Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 83 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, September 26, 2023, the committee is meeting to discuss its study on the Bill C-33, an act to amend the Customs Act, the Railway Safety Act, the Transportation of Dangerous Good Act of 1992, the Marine Transportation Security Act, the Canada Transportation Act, and the Canada Marine Act, and to make consequential amendments to another act. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing order, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and are able to join us remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I wish to inform all members of the committee that the witnesses appearing virtually have been sound tested for today's meeting for the benefit of our interpreters and have passed the test. Colleagues, appearing before us today as witnesses, we have from BMI Group, Justice Veldman, Managing Partner by video conference. Welcome, sir. From the Chamber of Shipping, we have Bonnie G, President by video conference. Welcome. From GCT Global Container Terminals Incorporated, we have Marko Dekovic, Vice President, Public Affairs. Welcome to you, sir. And from South Coast Ship Watch Alliance, we have Mr. Bruce McConkie, who's joining us in person. Welcome. We'll begin our opening remarks with you, Mr. Veldman, so I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, dear Chair and Shefki. I think I hope I pronounced that correct, and members of the committee. My name is Justice Veldman, and I'm the managing partner with the BMI Group, a property development company specializing in the repurposing of industrial infrastructure. As the largest developer of end-of-use paper mills in Ontario, with significant rail and water infrastructure in place, it is an honor to be invited to address amendments to this bill. In our Niagara Ports properties alone, we facilitated over $430 million of investment capital, creating well over 250 plus full-time permanent jobs. With our latest acquisition of 400 acres in Port Colborne, we own and operate in excess of 900 acres in total of port lands adjacent to the Welland Canal. With our existing partnership with the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority, the Niagara Ports Trade Corridor is amongst the top 5 in Canada. Our development in Northern Ontario in the town of Red Rock, another former paper mill town, which is the northmost port of Lake Superior, is inclusive of a full First Nation partnership and is in the process of signing an MOU with a significant lithium producer contingent on its development. The modernization of port operations, their security and efficiency is very much in our interest. We are heavily investing in the success of our projects and advocate for the modernization of the St. Lawrence Seaway, particularly the Welland Canal section, to unlock its full potential as an economic driver. The legacy structure we're working with makes it difficult to realize the full development potential of the regions we work in and the new traffic it will generate. Our continued challenging experience with the ongoing issues with the Seaway reinforces the need and urgency of updating and upgrading the structure of the Welland Canal corridor and its management. This corridor is a port that needs to be modernized to fully optimize this Transport Canada asset. Make no mistakes, bringing attention to the corridor will in fact strengthen supply chain fluidity and resilience. The efforts to strengthen relationships and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is recognized as a very positive step forward. We also recognize the efficiencies in inspection, including remote and automated systems, but they could present their own unique challenges that we are open to working through to enable the secure, efficient, and free flow of goods. We acknowledge the bill's request to extend ministerial powers and the subsequent potential for challenges to the Charter of Rights. However, given the Justice Minister's review, we trust these powers will benefit all Canadians, not to be used in excess, and will enhance the security of the supply chain sector. While the sector is largely east-west focus, we see and would stimulate for you to think about the significant opportunity for connecting the remote north to the south and the necessity of connecting isolated remote communities and developing regional potential in these. Economic development and infrastructure mandates to this effect will significantly contribute to the prosperity and security of the northern country. On behalf of the BMI Group, thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for your time, attention, and the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Veldman. Next, we will go to Ms. G. Ms. G, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee once again. The Chamber of Shipping represents ocean carriers, shippers, and service providers that move Canada's trade to and from international markets. Since the introduction of Bill C-33 in November 2022, there have been some developments that should be taken into consideration with respect to the initial intent of the bill. These include the passage of Bill C-47, the Budget Implementation Act, the introduction of Bill C-52, and the establishment of the Supply Chain Office that will facilitate the development of a national supply chain strategy as recommended by the National Supply Chain Task Force. Bill C-47 amends the Canada Transportation Act, which enables a collection of information from any users of the national transportation system to ensure the efficiency and proper functioning of the national transportation system. Bill C-52, introduced in June this year, seeks to further amend the Canada Transportation Act, as well as the Canada Marine Act, to enhance transparency and accountability in the setting of port fees. These bills, together with the National Supply Chain Office, should take precedence and are foundational to strengthening ports in Canada by supporting a cohesive and transparent data strategy that will improve supply chain responsiveness and agility. While we recognize the intent of Bill C-33 is to improve how the Government of Canada manages disruptions, we would caution that taking a piecemeal approach to legislative amendments without a national supply chain strategy may result in some unintended consequences and create even more of an administrative burden for our members. My comments will focus on the proposed amendments to the Customs Act, Marine Transportation Security Act, and the Canada Marine Act. The Chamber of Shipping supports the proposed amendments to the Customs Act as we understand the need to expedite the movement of containers identified for secondary exams to immediately address potential health, safety, and security risks. We strongly urge Canada Border Services Agency to move forward with the adoption of less intrusive technologies to expedite the examination process and reduce the cost of the exams. CBSA, as the lead agency for public safety, must be adequately resourced to support the expansion of container facilities across Canada in a timely manner. A report recently released by the City of Delta last month associates increased container traffic to the proliferation of drugs and elements of crime in communities. The report highlights concerns with the Marine Transportation Security Act, MTSA, and the fragmented approach to port security responsibilities. Amendments to the MTSA in Bill C-33 failed to strengthen the security framework and rather focus on expanding the mandate of the Act to include direct and indirect risks to the health of persons involved in the marine transportation system and provide additional authorities to direct vessels. Expanding the MTSA to regulate health risks that are already regulated under the Marine Occupational and Safety Regulations appears unnecessary. Furthermore, if there is a need to issue an emergency direction to a vessel of concern for health safety reasons, authorities exist within the Public Health Agency of Canada under the Quarantine Act. The intention and desired outcome of the expanded mandate of the MTSA require further explanation and clarification on how a health risk would be assessed and determined under the Act. We continue to raise concerns about the overlapping and duplicative regulations and authorities, particularly in the marine transportation sector. Canada takes a multi-agency approach that involves a network of departments, which often, from an industry perspective, results in confusion and inefficiencies in decision-making and direction. A country surrounded by 3 oceans requires a clear maritime authority that can eliminate gaps and confusion in marine safety, security, and environmental protection, and strengthen Canada's global position as a trading nation. The expanded purpose of the Canada Marine Act and the proposed amendments, which will enable port authorities to maintain the security and enhance the resiliency of supply chains in a manner that safeguards national security and promotes healthy competition dynamics, is supported. With reference to the added purpose that enables port authorities to manage traffic, including moorage and anchorage, in order to promote the efficiency of supply chains, this is only relevant to vessels with import cargoes. It should be clear that vessels typically seen at an anchorage are waiting for Canadian export cargoes to arrive and are a symptom of an inefficient supply chain. The direct management of export vessels has no direct influence on improving the efficiency of the supply chain, but are often used to improve the fluidity of supply chains by taking partial loads. On amendments to the Canada Marine Act, that appear to address governance concerns that are only specific to Canada's largest port, and therefore proposed amendments in Bill C-33 may be rather onerous for smaller ports. The bill does not address variability in the size, operations, and resource capacity of port authorities, nor does it assess each authority's capability to meet their legislative mandate. These recommendations, together with a suggestion to consider the complementarities regional ports, were also documented in the What We Heard report during the Port Modernization Review and were not captured in Bill C-33. In Western Canada, the 2022 revenues for the four port authorities range from $4.8 million to $305 million. The status of the existing 17 port authorities and possibly new port authorities should be reviewed. Thank you. And that concludes my remarks. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. G. Next, we have Mr. Dekovich. Mr. Dekovich, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir. Mr. Dekovich, I just wanted to make sure that you're not on mute. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to appear before you. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at GCT Global Container Terminals, headquartered in Vancouver. We are the largest majority Canadian-owned container terminal in the country, and we're a tenant of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Bill C-33 was born from a chorus of voices from the private sector, labor unions, and Indigenous communities, all calling on the government to address the functioning of our supply chain and specifically the network of Canada Port Authorities. Since then, Bill C-52 was also introduced and in some ways better addresses some of the shortcomings of Bill C-33. Today, my comments will exclusively focus on the proposed changes to the Canada Marine Act within Bill C-33. It is of utmost importance for all members of the committee to understand the current workings of our port system. Private sector companies operate port terminals, handling various goods, including bulk, breakbulk containers, and autos, to name some. They assume all the risks associated with investing in terminal infrastructure, acquiring and retaining customers, and navigating economic fluctuations. These private companies are tenants of port authorities, and port authorities impose rents, collect rents, escalating fees, and regulations upon those private sector operators, all while assuming little to no risks themselves. As you review and potentially shape Bill C-33, I implore the committee to consider a fundamental question. Do you wish port authorities to function as governance and regulatory bodies overseeing the supply chain with transparency? Or would you prefer for them to remain as they are now, operating opaquely as monopolistic quasi-market players generating revenue for themselves without any real accountability? This decision is crucial as it will shape how you approach every aspect of Bill C-33. For instance, consider the recommendation to modify the borrowing limits for port authorities. Increasing the borrowing limits of port authorities does not necessarily stimulate private investment. Rather, it can deter it. This happens because port authorities must repay what they borrow with interest, and this cost ultimately falls on the shoulders of terminal operators, who in turn pass it to their customers and leading to potential inflation. Port authorities should rarely need to borrow if they're fulfilling their mandate correctly, which is to facilitate trade and grow their private sector tenants. When the private sector is assured of its growth potential, it will invest. Port authorities can also use their lease arrangements or lease agreements with tenants to encourage them to take on greater investment risk and thereby reducing the need for port authorities to borrow. Consider the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority as an example. Over the past 20 years, its borrowing limit has increased 3 times faster than the volume growth, growing by 385% while volumes grew by 98%. Given this incredible borrowing, one would assume that the port functions incredibly well. But as many of us will have seen, recent global rankings have shown that not to be the case. Therefore, it is evident that increasing borrowing by port authorities is unlikely to improve supply chain outcomes. Instead, we should focus on facilitating the private sector's desire to grow and expand. Port authorities should be asking, how can we assist growth rather than dictating what must be done and at times directly competing with private money. Along the entire west coast of Canada, private sector terminal investment projects are waiting to proceed. The primary obstacle most often is government regulation and often port authorities' individual interest. I commend the recent announcement by the Port of Prince Rupert, where it seems they have found a balanced approach. They've unlocked over $750 million investment by collaborating with private terminals, rail operators, and listening to customers. Not to use a cliche, but the customer is always right because ultimately the customer ends up paying. If we take that approach with our supply chain at a national level, we will succeed and potentially also save a lot of taxpayer dollars. In summary, it is crucial to get Bill C-33 right. And to achieve this, you must decide whether you want port authorities to determine what is best for Canada, or if you want the government to have more input and provide guardrails. You must choose whether to unleash private investment or send a message that it will become more expensive to be a customer or tenant of a Canada Port Authority due to increased regulatory burdens. And you must decide if you want to potentially risk more taxpayers' dollars by giving port authorities more borrowing powers, or do you want to push increased collaboration and identification of right investment opportunities with the private sector? Thank you again for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dekovich. And finally, for opening remarks, we have Mr. McConkey. Mr. McConkey, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Press the button. Is it live? Yes, live. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, bonjour, good day, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the Canada Marine Act. I am representing the South Coast Shipwatch Alliance, which is a collective voice of 8 coastal communities within the Southern Gulf Islands and adjacent Vancouver Island coastlines. This is important work that you are doing, and your dedication to the goal of preserving our environment, despite being from different political parties, is very much appreciated. I am here to encourage you on behalf of my fellow islanders, our children and grandchildren, and our Indigenous peoples of the West Coast to further your work and preserve a very special part of Canada with over 300 species at risk. The narrow waterways surrounding our islands are being used as an unnecessary overflow parking lot for the Port of Vancouver. Currently, there are 33 anchorages for large cargo ships designated for vessels waiting for a berth in the Port of Vancouver. Almost all ships using these anchorages are bulk carriers arriving empty to load coal and grain. They often arrive too early for their berthing times in the port, staying for weeks and occasionally months at a time. The increase in use has been staggering, from only 19 ships in 2009 to 476 ships last year, staying for 5,900 anchoring days. The negative environmental impacts of this anchoring are significant and increasing. Our air is being polluted by the constant spewing of diesel exhaust from large onboard generators, up to 10 tons of greenhouse gases per ship per day. This in a region just declared by our provincial government as high smoke sensitivity zone. Excessive noise, both above and underwater, is created by these cargo ships at anchor and during transits to these anchorages. Underwater noise disrupts the feeding, breeding, navigation, and communications of marine species, especially the threatened southern resident killer whales. Above water, the very health of coastal residents is being affected. The seabed ecosystems of our Salish Sea are constantly being scoured by large anchor chains. And we are living with the constant fear of a major incident as a result of ships dragging their anchors during winter storms. The resulting oil spill would be catastrophic. Now, we are concerned that the consequence of the word anchorage in F2 of Bill C-33 is to allow the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, an industrial entity, to implement its plan to expand its jurisdictional boundaries to include cargo ship anchorages within the Southern Gulf Islands and the adjacent Vancouver Island waters. This should not happen. These anchorages are unnecessary. If the Port of Vancouver implemented a modern vessel arrival system and restricted early arrivals, as is done in ports elsewhere, if the Minister of Transport would demand that the port require all-weather grain loading, currently grain cannot be loaded in the rain in Vancouver, if the federal government would suspend shipping of thermal coal, a major contributor to climate change, and if the supply chain to the port was optimized and many inefficiencies addressed, we would see an end to this attack on fragile ecosystems of our Salish Sea. For years now, the Indigenous peoples of our Salish Sea and we coastal residents have been sounding the alarm about the ever-increasing attack on our marine environment, our air, and our health. Bill C-33 has raised our hopes that finally our government will strengthen that important clause of the Act under the purpose D, provide for a high level of safety and environmental protection. Now, we support the marine transportation industry and its contribution to the Canadian economy, as stated in the purpose of the Act, but no economic gains can buy back our environment. Now, it was 5 years ago this month that my fellow coastal resident Chris Straw passionately addressed this committee on this same topic. Unfortunately, he has passed away without realizing the dream of elimination of these anchorages. On his behalf, on the behalf of all islanders in the Southern Gulf Islands and the adjacent Vancouver Island, we need your help now to protect the Salish Sea. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConkey. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and your passion for the industry and for the environment. It's been interesting to hear all these perspectives on this bill. I want to start with the Chamber of Shipping. We obviously, this bill was marketed as being a kind of a response to the National Supply Chain Task Force. And one of the specific more controversial issues about that was, what do we do to ensure that we are able to maintain the supply chain when there are labor disruptions? That sort of, it was identified as a major concern. I'm wondering if you can speak to whether you believe the bill should have addressed that issue, and maybe specifically address the issue of the impact that the closure of the St. Lawrence Seaway will have on your member companies, your membership in the immediate and medium-term future.
I thank you for the question, Mr. Strahl. Unfortunately, I think my camera is frozen here. I'll try and reset it while somebody else is speaking. So with regards to managing disruptions, I don't expect that Bill C-33 would address labor disruptions. It was really meant, I think, to address some of the recent disruptions we had with respect to blockades, wildfires, atmospheric rivers. For those, I mean, I don't think we would expect Bill C-33 to prevent labor disruptions from happening, because we don't want to affect our labor force and their ability to properly negotiate and strike if needed. With respect to, sorry, I forgot your other question. Oh, with regards to the St. Lawrence Seaway and
the St. Lawrence Seaway, the impact of that closure.
That is
on your
unfortunately, we
membership.
primarily represent carriers on the West Coast, so we may see diversion of trade through the West Coast as a result of that seaway closure. Fortunately, we have the capacity here to manage additional movements of grain products, for instance.
And on the West Coast, we've obviously heard some testimony about the anchorages which were just mentioned. What is there an alternative location for those? Obviously, we're seeing an increased use of all of the anchorages that are available to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. I guess the question is, where else could they go, and what happens to ships that arrive and there is no anchor, the anchorages are full? Do they simply idle offshore in a holding pattern? And what, in your opinion, is that better or worse for the environment to have ships kind of continuing to move around in the ocean while they wait for their turn at the port?
We have worked with the Pilotage Authority and the BC Coast Pilots in identifying some alternative anchorage location. When we actually worked with the community stakeholders and looking at the existing anchorages, we realized that some of the anchorages that are currently in place won't meet the demands for the future growth of the industry. And we actually had identified a number of anchorages in other locations, but we were told that there really is no process in place for establishing new anchorages at this time. Unfortunately, when vessels cannot obtain an anchorage, yes, they are spending time drifting offshore, waiting to be called in. And we estimate that the GHG impact of those vessels offshore 3 times more than what it would be if a vessel was sitting at an anchorage.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 1 minute, 50 seconds, Mr. Strahl.
Okay. Mr. Covid, I appreciated your perspective on the role of the private sector and maybe a little explanation on how ports operate. And obviously, Bill C-52 does allow for a little more transparency on how rates are set. We've heard from, in previous testimony, that the additional cost, the additional burden, administrative burden of some of the changes that are proposed in Bill C-33 could range up to $200,000 a year, for instance, for additional reporting, additional staff to oversee that. When the Port Authority, when the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority takes on a $200,000 additional bill, who pays for that in the end? Does that get passed down to you as a terminal operator, or understanding of how additional costs incurred by the Port Authority are paid for?
Thank you for that question. So, port authorities are supposed to be financially self-sufficient, meaning that they generate revenue from assessing fees and rents onto the users, tenants. So that any additional cost that's assigned to the port authorities ultimately is collected from tenants and the vessels and the people using the port. So it can be tenants, it can be vessels through wharfage and berthage, but ultimately it's the customer in the end customer that pays, which of course can potentially provide increased inflationary pressures.
Thank you very much,
Right.
Mr. Dekovich, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. Next, we go to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, turn the floor over to you. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses today. It's great that you're here to give us the benefit of your experience, expertise in this, trying to tackle this study. So we try to get it right for Bill C-33. First off, Mr. Dekovich, we've heard that measures like in Bill 33 will improve supply chain efficiency. At least that's our hope. Do you agree with that is the case? And what measures in particular do you think would be most effective in optimizing supply chain outcomes?
Thank you for the question. So to me, it is not clear which parts of Bill C-33 will ultimately improve efficiency. If we want to create more efficient and resilient system, we ultimately need to invest in some spare infrastructure leading to and from our ports. I don't see how Bill C-33 does that. And sorry, your second part of the question was?
Just asking, what measures do you think would be most effective in optimizing supply chain outcomes?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, it's creating that additional infrastructure, or the pipeline, if you will, be it of road and rail infrastructure leading to and from ports. Ultimately, it's important to remember that 70% of everything we trade here is moved by rail from the West Coast. So making sure that our rail system is resilient and it can support growth of the supply chain is of utmost importance.
Thank you. Turn to Mr. McConkey. Am I pronouncing that correct? Should C-33 pass, the federal government would have the authority to make regulations with respect to how anchorages are managed at the ports. And so what kind of things should would you like to see in these potential regulations that might be enacted to manage that?
Our ultimate goal is the elimination of the anchorages because they are unnecessary, and language to that effect to give the Minister of Transport authority to declare the Southern Gulf Island waters and adjacent Vancouver Island waters a special sanctuary zone. The Minister of Transport under the Canada Shipping Act does have that power already, and we would like to see in the legislation that's coming forward to back that up.
So given the amount of traffic that flows through Vancouver as a port, is that realistic in your mind?
Remember, container ships don't anchor. They are scheduled wonderfully to be into port because it's a very economic penalty for them to be hovering on anchor. The main ships are coal, and if you can believe it, Canada is still allowing the export of thermal coal, and a lot of it is being mined in the United States. Washington, Oregon, and California prohibit it due to environmental concerns, yet we're still bringing it up on trains and shipping it out. There's a lot of ships arriving very early to pick up thermal coal, which we all know is a huge contributor to climate change. The grain can't be loaded in the rain in Vancouver yet. That makes vessels have to sit idle at anchorages, and the prairie grain farmers don't get paid. They can't ship their product. So improve that, get rid of thermal coal, and you're a long way on your way towards elimination.
Thank you for that. Ms. Gee, some of the previous witnesses that we've heard from have raised the need for more flexibility for smaller ports. Do you agree with this? And what types of flexibility do you think would be most beneficial for smaller ports?
So when ports were developed 25 years ago, they have different resources and they have the same aging infrastructure to maintain. So my thought is that they probably need some better financing options to maintain the infrastructure that they currently have. In terms of what's being proposed in Bill C-33 to add new advisory and Indigenous and community advisory committees, I mean, they're very, many of these offices are very small in terms of the staffing and their capabilities. So to add those obligations onto the smaller port authorities is challenging.
Thank you. So I guess, Mr. McConkey, I'll come back to you. What are the challenges with how Vancouver Fraser Port Authority currently manages anchorages? You mentioned a number of them. So just one final comment on that, maybe, just for the benefit of the committee.
Actually, they only manage the anchorages under the interim protocols for ships anchoring in the southern BC waters currently. The federal government still has jurisdiction. The Port of Vancouver has no jurisdiction. And they're just came up with an interim plan that has not worked that was supposed to allocate these ships to different anchorages, and basically it spread the pain, and we saw a huge, as I pointed out earlier, huge increase in the number and the use of those anchorages.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and thank you, Mr. McConkey. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelo-Duval. À vous la parole. 6 minutes.
Mr. Barcelo-Duval, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to begin with Mr. Dikovic. I hope I pronounced that right. GCT, Global Container Terminals. During prior meetings, witnesses have often spoken of the nomination of the chair of the Board of Ports by government, and this is an amendment that is being presented in C-33. As a business, working directly with ports, as a client of the ports, I believe, how do you perceive this will of having, for the government, essentially control over who might become chair of the Port Authority?
Thank you for that question. it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is that ultimately Bill C-33 has to decide which way do we want to go. Do we want to create port authorities that are more government-like and more government agency-like, or create them more and push them more to be more private sector market players with some government oversight? So what we have right now, though, is that, and we've experienced this in Vancouver, is that ultimately there was no direct link or accountability for one port authority. Leadership is not necessarily, in line with what the priorities may be or may not be of the government, or in case tenants. There was many tenants that had some challenges in Vancouver, and ultimately there was no mechanism to directly address that. And so by having the chair of the port ultimately accountable to somebody in government will increase that accountability or chain of command to the minister. So at least the tenants, private sector and users of the port can approach the minister and expect some answer or action, because currently when that is done, the answer is that ports are arm's length and there's nothing that can be done. So of course, that's an example where we can show there, of course, is also a negative where the government can more potentially politically influence the operations of the port and leadership of the port, and there's some challenges with that. But there's no perfect answer. The question more is like, which way does the government want to push the port authorities to be more government or more private sector?
Mais de ce que je comprends de votre réponse, c'est que...
So, if I understand correctly, the signal that it sends out clearly is that politics would have more influence over the management of ports, because there would be a direct link with the minister who would be nominating the chair. Now, Mrs. G, from the Chamber of Shipping. Perhaps I could obtain her opinion on the same subject. Mrs. G?
Similar to what Mr. Djokovic just mentioned, I mean, our concern would be the politicization of the chair appointment.
Merci. Puisque je vous ai avec moi en ce moment.
Thank you. And since you're here right now, I heard you speak earlier on the impact that these new measures might have on small ports, and this is something that I hold dear, because if there are ports such as Montreal and Vancouver that are large ports with huge volumes, and if they're asked to have a larger amount of groups to consult with communities and First Nations, or, for example, to implement or to send in quarterly financial statements, I have no doubt that they'll have the resources to implement this. However, I do have some doubts on the impact this might have on smaller ports with fewer staff, little capacity, and they'd have to expend a lot of energy to do this. So at what size do you think that a port goes from a category, from a smaller port to a larger port, or should we set a limit if we decide to say, okay, these new measures will only apply for larger ports?
Thank you for the question. When I was looking at their revenue structure, I think it's important to note the purpose of the Canada Marine Act was to provide trade enabling infrastructure. And when you look at the financial statements, some of these ports actually, their primary source of revenue is from managing marinas, not facilitating trade. So that may be a criteria that you look at, as well as how do they derive their revenue.
Donc pour vous, c'est une question de...
So you think it's to see where do the revenues come from, but also there's the issue of the volume that would enter into play, I imagine. Here's an example. If a port has 3 boats a year compared to another that has 3 a day, I would imagine that the capacity is not the same.
Correct. And then we have a harbor authority that actually receives quite a number of cruise vessels, but yet they're not a port authority as well. So it certainly needs to be looked at carefully.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Next, we have Ms. Cirillo. Ms. Cirillo, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. And it certainly seems it's time for some modernizing of how we're managing the ports or not managing the ports. I'm going to really focus on something relatively narrow, though. So for Mr. McConkey, and this is just in relation to the frustration of islanders of how long this anchorage problem has been going on. You mentioned 5 years ago. There was a visit here. I'm sure it was going on far before that. And it's certainly one of the reasons why my colleague, Alistair McGregor, has a private member's business and private member's bill around this C305, an act to amend shipping. And this is really in regards to modernization, where considerations around protecting biodiversity, considerations around the environment didn't seem to play into the initial planning. And as my colleague has said many times, MP McGregor, to stop the precious waterways being used as an overflow parking lot. So I guess I did want to get some more insights and some more understanding of how we go from 19 to 476 vessels that are hanging out in the overflow parking lot.
I've been, since a teenager, I've been going into the Gulf Islands, and I've bought property there in 1978 and have lived there now permanently for 23 years. I know those waterways wonderfully, and there's precious, high extreme winds in the wintertime, strong currents, those kind of things. We rarely saw, before 2009, a ship, actually a cargo ship, anchoring in those waters, rarely. And then all of a sudden there was a change, and then it kept increasing and increasing, and there was no stoppage. And then in 2018, when the federal government came out with the interim protocols, suddenly the anchoring increased again. In fact, in Ladysmith and Saltaire, which never saw ships before 2018, suddenly were inundated with ships. And now they're just anchoring constantly just offshore from very small communities and creating huge underwater noise and above water noise in there. The port wanted to expand, but it didn't provide the infrastructure, and it didn't address the supply chain. And then it went and it accepted American thermal coal to ship on top of that. So you look how it compounds and compounds. And a lot of the vessels that are arriving early are getting there because it's a free anchorage. There's no jurisdiction, no monitoring, nothing. And that's, as a result, we've been seeing the anchor drag groundings and collisions in our local waters.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to ask Ms. Guy then, if kind of the same question about insights. Could you share with us some insights on why you think that the anchorage or the vessels went from 19 to 476 in a matter of just around 10 years?
Sure. There's been tremendous growth in our bulk exports through the Port of Vancouver. There has been some changes as well in operational policies within the port, where vessels are limited to a stay of 7 days within the Port of Vancouver. So we do see often vessels bouncing around more often. I just wanted to clarify that these vessels are not arriving just to randomly wait for cargo. These vessels are actually contracted to be there. There's a laycan within their charter parties where vessels need to arrive within a certain time and to be inspected and ready to load grain. To eliminate the anchorages would severely disrupt the supply chain. Often vessels are entered into contracts with shippers maybe 10 to 12 weeks in advance. Unfortunately, I don't think shippers have confidence in when they'll actually get rail service. So what happens is that they think that their cargo may be arriving at the ports within a certain time or a certain date. So they ask the vessel to be there, but in reality, that just doesn't work. So there's been a lot of focus on improving data, digitalization of the supply chain, and understanding, where are the bottlenecks? Are there areas where we can improve the fluidity of the supply chain? And I think that a lot of that work is going to happen under the supply chain task force. And we're hopeful that's a start. We need to understand what we're working with.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask Mr. Dejkovic, just in relation to the amount of debt, the amount of borrowing that's happened. So has the amount of borrowing driven up the number of vessels that are coming in?
No, I don't think that correlation can be drawn directly, but ultimately, if the port grows, it is expected that the number of anchorages will grow. Think of it as a shopping mall. If the mall expands, you will need more parking spots for the cars outside the mall to service that facility.
Okay, and can I go back to Ms. Guillen just to ask about the rail? So what are the problems with rail? I mean, even in my office in Port Moody, Coquitlam, I hear from suppliers, people that are waiting. What's the problem with rail right now?
I think it's the reliability, and there's such a demand on the railways right now. There's quite a diversification of cargoes that are moving right now. Fortunately, right now, the container volumes are lower than usual, so we should have better fluidity than in previous years. But it's just managing the diversity of cargoes that are coming through the ports.
Thank you very much, Ms. G, and thank you, Ms. Zerillo. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses here today for your contribution to our review of Bill C-33. I want to ask Mr. Dekovic, if I'm saying that correctly, Dekovic. You talked about that continuum between government-like versus private sector market players with some government oversight. And so where do you see Bill C-33 pushing that continuum?
I think it is not clear. There's some things that are moving it more toward a government-centric authority, like with assessing fees, and Bill C-52, for example, is going to provide some greater transparency and oversight. But there are other things where it's basically allowing it to continue to have more private sector powers that are backed up by government. And so some of the private sector, market, private sector profit-driven things the Port Authority has are also not being correspondingly guardrailed. Because if you have a monopolistic, quasi-private entity that also has government regulatory powers and no direct accountability to anyone, that is the challenges we've seen with some port authorities. And again, to what was pointed before by Ms. G, is that there are different sizes of port authorities, and this is perhaps only applicable to larger port authorities. Smaller port authorities have different challenges, and perhaps that should also be looked at through this act to actually target and revisit how port authorities are classified or even created.
At the beginning of this study, we had some witnesses from Transport Canada, and we asked the question whether cost analysis had been done for the various oversight bodies, the regulations that were going to be added, et cetera. And surprisingly, the answer was no. As a tenant of ports, and just what you've just said, does that concern you?
Yes.
And we've had the witness testimony that could be, again, because you've raised the point that there's different sizes of ports. It could be $200,000 per annum was what one group told us. It was a couple of additional employees is what another group told us. And you said at the outset, it's the private companies like yourself are assuming all the risks. So do you see Bill 33 adding some of these burdens really as, is it excessive, and what's the right balance?
Yeah, the right balance is to be struck. I think that a cost analysis of these additional advisory bodies, oversights should be done. At the same time, additional powers that would be granted to port authorities to assess fees also they need to be balanced with, what kind of powers they have and transparency on what they do with those fees. So I think it is important to actually look Bill C-33 in companionship with Bill C-52, and it'll be important to get Bill C-52 right, that the right level of transparency is provided to the tenants and the public about what port authorities do with the revenues they generate.
And at your first read of C-52, is that happening, or are there concerns?
No, Bill C-52 is definitely a step in the right direction. It will, for the first time, give tenants and users of the Port Authorities ability to at least ask and question, the increases to the fees or the size of the fees or what is being done. I'm sure there's some little tweaks when we study and dig deeper into the bill, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
You talked in your opening statement as well about unleashing the private sector investment, and I think that's important if we're going to achieve, what I think is the intention of supply chain fluidity and the economic potential that we have. I mean, obviously, the Port of Vancouver is our gateway to Asia, and has many important. It's critically important to our economy. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more about that, and where is Bill C-33 deficient in that?
Well, it is not clear in Bill C-33 where it actually, makes the operating environment for private sector more cost-effective or more nimble or more predictable. Those are things that attract private sector investment. It appears that it adds more regulatory advisory bodies, more hoops and challenges for anybody looking to invest into the gateway, more procedures, etc. So it is not clear that would be attractive to the private sector. And furthermore, existing private sector operators, if there's limits to borrowing powers of Port Authorities further removed, or there being less accountability and less checks and balances, it will further provide, a cold water shower onto the investment from the existing terminal because they won't know what the cost burden would be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dekovic, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we'll go to Mr. Iaccono. Mr. Iaccono, à vous la parole. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to welcome to all the witnesses and thank you for all your input with respect to Bill C-33. Mrs. G, do you think the provisions of in C-33 will help the port better manage traffic? And do you think this will improve the overall situation with anchorages in BC?
The port's already moving, the Port of Vancouver specifically is already moving forward on allocating anchorages. So there are authorities within their current letters patent that enable them to direct traffic within their jurisdiction and vessels that are due into their port as well. Data is a big part of what we need to improve our operations. Our vessels definitely want to improve the port optimization. They definitely don't want to be sitting around waiting for cargoes as well. So I think we're all on the right track. We're moving in the direction of getting more data to better understand where the bottlenecks are. So, but I don't think Bill C-33 necessarily changes that direction that's already underway.
Does Bill C-33 change anything? What does it bring some improvement?
Frankly, I don't see much in it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCarthy, sorry. Same question for you. The provisions of C-33, and will it help the port better manage its traffic and also improve the overall situation with the anchorages?
Not currently. That's what we're hoping the amendments come through. I worked in the aviation industry for 39 years, and I'm very familiar with efficient arrival systems and especially non-efficient arrival systems. And I understand in this day and age how the Port of Vancouver cannot communicate with vessels that are across the ocean and schedule them in properly like an airport would do. Because airports that didn't schedule properly paid the price. The ones that got their scheduling improved, expanded, and a good example is Chicago, excellent arrival systems. Other areas, poor arrival systems, aircraft circling overhead, burning excess amounts of fuel. In essence, we have sort of the same thing. Unfortunately, I'll take a little exception for Ms. G's comments about ships needing to come and be checked and it taking time. Well, does it take weeks and months? We have to look at that kind of a thing. And also, Bill C-33 needs to strengthen the ability of the port and demand that it improve its infrastructures, as I mentioned with the all-weather grain loading, those kind of things. Elaborate on the all-weather?
Can you elaborate a bit more on what part it has to strengthen?
Well, currently, as I expressed earlier, the concern is the fact under the current amendment allowing the word, when they put the word anchorage in there, opens the door to give jurisdiction to the Port of Vancouver to have jurisdiction over the Southern Gulf Island waters and adjacent Vancouver Island. That's our huge concern for us, and that because it's right at the bottom of the list for efficiency currently. It needs to improve that dramatically, and we need to give the transport minister the power to demand that these things improve.
Thank you. How much time do I have? Thank you. Mr. Dekovic, as a terminal operator, can you speak to some of the challenges you faced working with the port authorities, and do you think C-33 will help improve the relationships between ports and tenants?
Thank you for the question, and I can only speak to the one port authority where we operate, and that is the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. We did operate terminals in Port of New York, New Jersey, but it is a very different approach there. I can specifically to Vancouver Fraser Port, they built C-33. There isn't much in it other than perhaps that there will be a mechanism for the minister to appoint the chair, which I mentioned earlier, will then at least give some powers for tenants and users of the port to at least go to a political master of the Port Authority to ask for some remedies or at least review or input. That is not provided right now, so that is potentially the only way that it can improve a situation where tenants and port authorities and users are maybe not collaborating or working eye to eye. Historically, when terminal operators grow, port authorities grow, and there's a symbiotic must-have relationship there. We've had some challenges and bumps along the way, and I can report that even with the recent leadership changes at Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we're starting to see some change in dynamic and interpretation in which Canada Marine Act is interpreted by the Port Authority and approach with the tenants. There's some improvement and light on the horizon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dekovic, and thank you, Mr. Iacono. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, Mr. McConchie, I'm quite surprised to see the scope. How many ships are anchored? You said there were almost none, and there's been an explosion since 2018. So I'm not really. When you're explaining this and you say that there is a lack of planning of synchronization between the boat that has to anchor somewhere and the management of goods, there seems to be a lack of synchronization among the stakeholders. But here's a question. It seems that from an efficiency point of view, the crew is being paid, and there's fuel that's being burned, and so a stationary boat is not productive. So this cannot be profitable for the business. So how is it that this situation has been ongoing for so long? I don't know if you have the answer to this or not.
We search for the anchor. We search for the answer, I should say. To give you an example, in 2009, we've got some great data people, even though we're all volunteer. There were 262 total days at anchor for ships in 2009. And the interim protocols came out in 2018. There were 3,082 anchorages days. 2022, that has increased to 5,900. So the ships arriving earlier, it supports that, because that translates into weeks for some of them and months occasionally. We've been pointing out and providing solutions that we think from our perspective would help. Back to the thermal coal exports, the infrastructure improvements, supply chain improvements. And as I mentioned, 5 years ago this month, my friend Chris Straw brought those same issues, economic issues. When a ship is sitting at anchor, it does nothing for the Canadian economy. It's empty. There's not, people complain about the fact, well, I'm not getting my goods and that, but no, they are not container ships. These are empty ships arriving.
Malheureusement, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
I'm sorry, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, your time is up.
Mr. Rillo, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. And Mr. McConkey, I'm so intrigued of what is going on and why these increases have been so dramatic. So I want to get to the bottom of that a little bit. I want to understand that. And I wonder if you could give me any hints of what data I should be looking for internally here to get that answer. But I also wonder, too, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of the impacts that this has had on coastal communities, this kind of increase in traffic.
Oh, absolutely huge impacts. As I mentioned, the above water noises, the generators, these ships are sitting quite high out of the water, and the generators and noise carrying across water, as if you've ever been on a lake and you can hear someone talking on the other side, that constant level increased as high as, at some places in Ladysmith, 66 decibels. This is in the middle of the night, and so people are being impacted that way. But the underwater noise is extensive too, and the studies that are coming out now that the marine life is being affected by the vibration of these diesel generators at anchor underwater. And then add in the transits. The federal government closed an area right near my home to all vessel traffic for sports, everyone, right off Plumper Sound on North Pender. However, it allows all of these bulk carriers to transit right past that exact. And the reason they closed it was the southern resident killer whales foraging zone, and it was impacting that. So they shut it down to us, allowed the freighters to continue in that. And if you want lots of data, we've been asking the federal government to accept our data. We have some wonderful data that's all backed up factually. We've been gathering it for many years now. I've been at this for a long time. I'm going gray over it. And we would be pleased to provide any information in that regard to you.
Please, I'm making an open request here for that data to come to this committee, please. I guess one more question, if I've got a little minute. I just want to ask you specifically about the ministerial authority over vessel direction that's been proposed here. Do you believe this will reduce those anchorage times?
I'm sorry,
the amendment for a ministerial authority to direct vessels. Do you think it will reduce?
If the ministerial authority, if it gives the strength to the Minister of Transport to declare that area and immediately start reducing and then eliminating the use of the anchorages there due to its environmental value and its fragile ecosystems, that's kind of what we'd like to see. It's, once again, economics cannot buy back our environment.
Thank you, Mr. McConkey, and thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Dukovich, back to you. We heard from the port authorities. We've heard from many port authorities their desire to have the borrowing limit essentially eliminated, and for them to be able to borrow as much money as they would like to. I think in your opening statement you mentioned taxpayer risk there. How is the taxpayer put at risk by port authorities borrowing? Maybe you can explain that a little bit more.
Thank you. Yes. So borrowing limit and whatever money is borrowed by the Port Authority, as I mentioned, is ultimately paid by the tenants and the users. In situations where that borrowing far exceeds what ultimately can be borne by the tenants and the users, there is a risk that, and it's never been stress tested, but that the Port Authority may basically default on its payments, especially if it's borrowed on low interest rates and interest rates keep rising. An example would be a multi-billion dollar, like $5 or $7 billion project like Roberts Bank Terminal 2 that Vancouver Fraser Port Authority is trying to borrow money for. That type level of borrowing could potentially bankrupt the port if the project doesn't materialize and if they're not able to find a private sector partner to ultimately pay for that project. And that would ultimately put the taxpayers at risk. Somebody would have to pay, government would have to step in and bail out a port authority, and in that turn would put taxpayer monies at risk.
So you mentioned the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 and the multi-billion-dollar price tag. So was that exemption to the borrowing limit built into that application and that approval, or were they able to borrow $5 to $7 billion based on the current system? Like, I guess my question would be, do they need an increase, do the port authorities need an increased borrowing limit if they're already being approved for RBT2 at that level of project?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, that is probably a great question for Porto, but as far as I know, that is a separate decision that the government needs to make around borrowing limits, regardless of the environmental assessment decision for individual projects.
Okay. One of the things that we've heard about as well in witness testimony is concern about the composition of the board directors for port authorities. Obviously, the users have a nominating committee. They recommend people to be appointed to the board. There's been some suggestion that that perhaps active ILWU should have a seat on the board, for instance, at the port of Vancouver. Others I know of users have indicated that maybe they should have active people from their organizations. Terminal operators or grain terminal operators should have someone on the board. What are your views on that? We've certainly heard from some who've said that would present a clear conflict of interest to have active members of either labor or management or the port users to be on the board. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so it goes back to kind of, again, earlier point that I was trying to make on where on the spectrum, if you will, the Port Authority land. If the Port Authority is going to become more of a regulatory body, but some of the commercial aspects of it are going to be siphoned off, then it is okay to have a representative board with such representations because there's no direct impact or influence to profit making. If the Port Authority is going to be as it is now, where ultimately it is in a profit-making business, having a representative body would put those individuals in a conflict of interest. So right now, the representatives on the Port Authority board have a fiduciary duty ultimately to the Port Authority to generate, to do what is best for the Port Authority to generate revenue. So I think it becomes an issue of how the pendulum is going to swing and what direction the lawmakers are going to undertake to give a direction where the port is going to exist.
So if they want it to be, if we decide, or the government, the parliament decides they want it to continue to be generating revenue, then the fiduciary duty to the Port Authority must be maintained. And we couldn't see, it would be irresponsible to have people that have other loyalties to sit on that board. Am I correct in that?
That is a reasonable opinion, and that would be my personal opinion too.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Perfect timing, and thank you, Mr. Dekovich. Next, we'll go to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all the witnesses for coming out today. My question is going to go to Mr. Veldman. Mr. Veldman, you're very much involved in the economy of my area, the Niagara region, as well as many areas throughout the country, from coast to coast to coast. You mentioned in your presentation that the Welland Canal Corridor is in fact a port because of its partnership with the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority, and with that is amongst the 5 biggest ports in the country. And you also mentioned that it needs to be modernized to fully optimize this Transport Canada asset. And I want to emphasize this because the Welland Canal is in fact a Transport Canada asset currently managed by the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation. So my first question is, do you feel that the Welland Canal Corridor, therefore being a port, and this bill attaching itself to modernizing ports, do you feel the Welland Canal Corridor should be aligned with the intentions set out in Bill C-33?
My quick answer, and thank you for the question, Mr. Badaway. My quick answer is yes, absolutely. Some of the infrastructure along the Welland Canal Corridor needs fairly significant capital upgrades. And I think by levering the private sector's investment and Transport Canada's ability to now invest into some of these assets through Bill C-33 allows for the Welland Canal to flourish, and by that, the Niagara region attract more industry.
My second question is, as you had just mentioned, with respect to the attachment it has to a new industry in Niagara, expanded, quite frankly, in terms of it, the multimodal network being a niche for the area. And as this corridor is considered a port in partnership with the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority, do you feel that a change in governance along the Welland Canal corridor can in fact help all partners define performance measurements?
It's a touchy subject. I will answer that as carefully as I can. I think the opportunity to enhance the Welland Canal by way of having a change of management through the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority is positive. We're happy to contribute, and I feel we are. I guess the fact of the matter is, over the last 50 years, Transport Canada has owned all kinds of lands along the Welland Canal, and has had its port infrastructure basically, the ability for vessels to stop along the Welland Canal significantly decreased. And by allowing the investment into the Welland Canal through Bill C-33 and localizing some of the inland port investments, I think it will help not only the private companies along the Welland Canal, but also the Transport Canada lands that the Seaway currently manages. So yes, some change is required because it hasn't worked for the last 50 years.
Thank you, Mr. Veldman. Third question, how does the Niagara Ports Trade Corridor diversify as well as strengthen Niagara's economy and improve multimodal performance, resiliency, and fluidity in global supply chains?
I'll give you a practical example. We had we purchased a abandoned building. It's stood abandoned for 8 years, called the Hayes Dana assembly plant, and we completely refurbished it. And we currently have one of our tenants in there called High Strength Plate and Steel. They import plate and steel from all over the world. By having our port open in the Welland Canal, and by right at Wharf 7 and 8, we're able to berth a vessel and actually bring steel right into the Niagara region for adding value to such commodities. So very practically, by having vessels being able to berth at our docks into the future, this obviously opens up the transportation corridor in a big way into Niagara.
And with the investments that you've made, particularly in the city of Thorold, with refurbishing and bringing back economy to the 2 empty pulp and paper mills, the work that you're doing in partnership with the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority with respect to the McCleary docks, as well as as you mentioned, the Hayes Dana property, how do you see your interests actually creating that fluidity within the supply chain, not only within Niagara, within Ontario, but across the entire country?
And it's like water. I always picture cargo like water. It has to be able to stop. So if there is abandoned infrastructure, which means that a vessel cannot berth, and we have not invested into dock infrastructure in the Welland Canal area for way too long, then that vessel simply has to carry on. And then that means that cargo now has to be trucked back to the Niagara region in order to reach its destination. While meanwhile, the vessel could have stopped 50 years ago. So I think by the good work that Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority is doing, some realignment possibly between the Transport Canada and the Seaway. And I will tell you that the private sector, just like us, and we're not the only ones that will step up in along the Niagara region, but we have so far done so. We'll continue to bring industry to Niagara.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veldman. Once again, thank you for participating in Niagara's economy.
Thank you, Mr. Veldman, and thank you, Mr. Badaway. Next, we'll go to Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Sorry, thank you. And let me pick up on some of the discussion already. So to Ms. G, what is preventing additional anchorages from being created in different areas?
Under the Convention Law of the Sea, vessels can actually anchor whenever necessary. But we know our carriers don't want to do that because of the unknown risks potentially. But we understand that there really is no process for establishing new anchorages. When the Harbors Board, that's what it's called, dissolved, the anchorages outside of port jurisdiction was kind of left in an unmanaged sphere, I guess you could say. Ultimately, anchorages are the responsibility of transport. The minister can identify when anchorages that are being used are not an appropriate location.
So currently, do your member companies have any issues with?
Sorry, Mr. Muse, I have a point of order from Mr. Barcel-Duval.
We don't see Mrs. Gee on the video. I know that earlier the same thing happened for Mr. Veltman. I'm wondering if there's a technical issue on our side or on their side. Thank you. We're going to check that.
Sorry, I think it's my camera. It's frozen again.
Okay. If it's okay with members, we good to proceed? If you don't mind, Ms. G, we'll proceed without being able to see you visually.
Sure, that's fine.
Does that work with everyone? Yep. Okay, please proceed, Mr. Muse. I'll make sure that you have the time that you had remaining.
So currently, do your member companies have any issues complying with the government directives on how they operate and where they are anchored?
No, we're actually, because some of the anchorages of concern being raised today are outside of the Port Authority's jurisdiction. Our members have agreed to follow an interim protocol that was established with Transport Canada and the Port Authority. We're actually just doing a nighttime planning pilot right now where vessels will not arrive between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., I believe. So there's a pilot in place right now to reduce disturbance to the communities surrounding those anchorages.
Mr. Dickovic talked about the fact that he quantified three things: nimble, predictable, cost-effective, and Bill C-33 is none of those. What's your reaction to that?
What Bill C-33 does do is try to manage how ports handle disruptions. And when we talk about the increased use of vessels at anchorages, we've had a significant number of disruptions in the last 5 years, which is, and we've mentioned that anchorage use is a symptom of a supply chain that isn't working. But other than that, I don't see a lot of other benefits to the bill amendments.
You talked about the administrative burden for your members. Do you feel that Bill C-33 actually adds to that rather than in remedies that?
Under the Marine Transportation Security Act, potentially, yes.
Some examples?
Some examples. For instance, I think every marine facility has a security plan in place. Now, if they have to incorporate how they manage human health risks within those marine security plans, that's going to create a lot of work for the marine facilities itself. And also there will be some interaction with the ship-based requirements as well. So that's one example.
Okay. Are you able, or have you, in discussion with some of your members, been able to sort of quantify what the cost impact of that would be?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. So switching back to Mr. Dickovic, you talked about, and I liked your sort of analysis of the three words, so I've borrowed that now: nimble, predictive, and cost-effective. Can you expand on that a bit more?
Sure. The key is that if we want, and I agree with Ms. G that ultimately, if there's some good parts in the bill that it would make it more predictable how the ports would react to disruptions in the supply chain, that is a good piece of the bill. But other parts are not necessarily nimble because they add a variety of different administrative burdens and not necessarily cost effective. As ultimately as you said, there doesn't appear to be a cost analysis done for the additional measures introduced in the bill. So I'm not sure how that would be cost effective. And predictability is key to attracting private investment. And by adding layers of regulation, but also advisory bodies that would have inputs into decision making of government entities, can further potentially delay decision making of government bodies, in this case, port authorities. And that, of course, is less predictable. And that, of course, can scare private investment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Mr. Dickovic. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Stéphane Lauzon. Monsieur Lauzon.
Mr. Lauzon, welcome to Transport and Infrastructure. You have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much to the witnesses for being here.
To spare my time with Madame Elisabeth May, je vais poser mes...
I'm going to ask my questions in French and share my time with Mrs. Elizabeth May. So, You have spoken quite extensively about environmental impacts, and this is very concerning, especially with the increase of the amount of boats that are anchored. Could you tell us if you have inventories of how many emissions for these boats now compared to 20 years ago when there was no concern? Do you have some sort of environmental assessment of a boat that's anchored?
As I mentioned earlier, each vessel, it's been calculated their diesel generators on board emit some 10 tons of CO2 per ship per day. Multiply that by 5,900 anchoring days, and that's quite impressive. Also, as I mentioned earlier, also the provincial government has recognized the area. It is a very sensitive zone for the air movement in that. So who's at risk? The people that are living there. So it becomes a health concern just from the emissions alone. And then add in the amount of fuel burned in transit to these anchorages, because it takes them 4 or 5 hours to transit up to these anchorages, and then back they go to go into their port eventually. So you've got continuous transits, which are burning actually the main engine fuels, and then at anchor, burning the diesel onboard generators.
Could you speak about the devastating impact that could happen if there was some sort of black, of some sort of oil spill? How can we improve the situation if there might be a potential oil spill in this area?
Okay, that's the problem. The waters are very narrow. There's winter storms race up through these waters, and there's no ability for the Port of Vancouver or anybody to actually have a continuous monitoring of it. The Coast Guard has told me that if it swings on an anchor drag outside of its swing radius that has been mapped, some bells will go off and they will call the ship's agent. Don't you think that's a little late? What happened right next to me in Plumper Sound, right in front of me, and I was home that day, is we looked out to see two vessels that had collided. And that was the vessels in 2020. And as a result of that, the Marine Transportation Safety Investigation Report stated that there were, between January 2015 and March 2020, a total of 102 dragging occurrences along the BC coastline. We were lucky. We've dodged a bullet. Back in 2009, the Hebei line grounded on a reef in the Navy Channel, just up the water from where I live. And the only reason that did not create a spill at the time was there was a rising tide and they were able to float it off beforehand. Since then, there have been more and more incidents. And if you check the Pacific Pilotage Authority, they have to send a pilot out to reposition a vessel if it goes outside of its swing radius. And that's happening numerous times, and it's ever increasing. That is our huge worry.
Thanks for your answer.
Merci, Monsieur Lauzon. We'll now turn over to Ms. May for one question. You have 1 minute and 15 seconds, Ms. May.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lauzon.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Dear colleague.
To switch to English to Bruce McConaughey. My question is, you've outlined pretty clearly the economic downsides and the ecological risks and damage and the impact on people's quality of life. One question is, to your knowledge, does this also impact on Indigenous rights? These are waters within the territories of the Wasanic people. Have they been consulted by Transport Canada? Have they given permission for these anchorages?
Little to no consultation with any coastal residents or any of our coastal First Nations with regards to that. And all of us have replied in opposition to what is going on there with very little feedback from the current federal Ministry of Transport.
Thank you very much, Ms. May, and thank you, Mr. McConaughey. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelot.
Mr. Barcelot Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Mr. McConaughey, I have to say that I'm quite sensitive to the reality that you're explaining, because I myself live in a riding that is next to the St. Lawrence Seaway, and sometimes I have I have people that call me and they say that they have vessels parked there. They say there's an infernal noise during the night. Nobody can sleep, and people we see people doing all their daily activities on the bridge of the vessel, and they can stay there for a long time. So I'm asking you questions because you're here for Bill C-33, but isn't there not already a political will for the government to do something to limit these anchorages, or at least to take this out of zones that are close to homes or ecologically sensitive areas? Because I find it quite surprising that if we have the good amendments that we can support, I will support them. But I'm still wondering, is there not already some way for the government to solve this issue?
Well, in the Prime Minister's letter to the Transport Minister, his mandate letter actually says, I expect you to seek opportunities within your portfolio to support our whole of government effort to reduce emissions, create clean jobs, and address the climate-related challenges communities are already facing. It's in the mandate letter. The purpose of the Act provides for safety and preservation of safety and the environment. We need, if you can strengthen that in the language, to give the Minister of Transport a pressure to act with regards to that, so that we can finally see an end to this and the damaging ecological aspects of it, and also the potential horrific, catastrophic oil spill that is inevitable.
Et pensez-vous que
Do you think that with C-33 and amendments we would arrive at that goal? So I'm trying to see if there are already tools and laws, but I imagine that there are already means for the government authorities federally to say, okay, well, the vessel should not be parked next to a reserve or where there's an ecological sensitivity or a few meters from people's from where people live. To your knowledge, there's no means to stop this right now other than through amendments that we would bring to C-33?
Please. No, the minister has the authority under the Shipping Act to stop it right now. We've gone now through 3 transport ministers who have ignored us and are pleased for this to take place. And then we see this is our concern in this bill with the words under F2, manage traffic, including mooring and anchorage. Those words in there suddenly open up the fact that the federal government is willing to accept these things.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConkey. Merci, Mr. Barcel-Duval. Concluding our line of questioning this evening, we have Ms. Cirillo. Ms. Cirillo, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And as a BC resident, and many of the residents that I speak to and speak to me are very concerned about the whales, or the residential killer whales. Can you just expand a little bit on the importance of this and the impacts that these anchorages are having in the Gulf Islands? Yeah.
Tremendous impact. In fact, those whales have become so important that, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, that an interim order has just come out restricting vessel traffic, any private vessel traffic or any traffic in certain areas of the water. So right around where I live, on near the Pender Islands and near Saturn Island. And yet it still allows these large ships to go cruising past them at whatever speed that they choose. The southern residents, it's so important to preserve their foraging grounds and their ability to communicate with each other and we have to be very cautious not to impact that too much, or we're going to lose that very precious resource.
Thank you so much. Okay, my last question is for Ms. Guy, and it really relates to climate change. We haven't had a lot of discussion about the impact of climate change on supply chains, and I was thinking about the trains, and I know in the lower Fraser and the Fraser Valley recently, there was catastrophic flooding that really limited the amount of vehicles that could get in and out, whether it was rail or road. So I just wonder if you could just expand on how much climate change is affecting land transportation, whether it be rail or road right now.
Well, certainly, we've seen some unprecedented events in recent years, and we certainly need more resilient infrastructure. So definitely it has an impact throughout the supply chain. And yeah, we're definitely all interested in trying to reduce GHG emissions where possible.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cirillo, and thank you, Ms. G. On behalf of all committee members, I would like to thank all of our witnesses who have joined us virtually or in person for joining us and providing their testimony this evening. With that, colleagues, we're going to go into committee business, and I will suspend for 5 minutes to allow the team to make the necessary changes, and I invite all witnesses to log off. Thank you all very much. We're now suspended.